Hello everyone, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I have a cluster of cards to share with you guys using two of the newest stamp and die sets from Honeybee Stamps from their May 2018 release. This is the new My Tribe stamp set, and what originally started as one card ended up turning into a cluster because I had the hardest time deciding on what card, like what image to use and what card to make. I started with this long border stamp with all the dream catchers and whatnot hanging from it. The stamp is really long. It's nearly 8 inches long, I think. So I pulled out my full-sized stamp platform so that I could stamp this across a piece of white cardstock. And I purposely put it off-center just for something a little different. Usually I like to, center everything and keep it all perfect. But stamped it slightly off-center, and I'd use my anti-static powder tool first. And then I inked up the stamp with Ink on 3's Juicy Embossing Ink. And then I coated the image with Simon Says Stamps Antique Gold Embossing Powder, which has almost a coppery finish to it. It's not full on copper, but it just has, that warmer look. So I melted all of that with my heat tool. So I now have this entire border image, and this was where I was like, I can't stamp just the one image. So I pulled out some black cardstock, and I'm lining up some of the sentiments from the set, and I really like how the pooling of the stamp, and that's like the back area of the stamp on these, on all the sentiments, it's squared up like this, so you can easily, create your sentiments and butt them all up against each other. So I did that with some of the sentiments in the set, and I'm going to stamp them onto some black cardstock with the same embossing ink, and then I'm going to use that same embossing powder. And this was where I was like, ooh, I really like how this looks. This embossing powder looks on black cardstock. And I'm like, I wonder how, all these other stamped images in the set would look on black cardstock too, because I really liked how it looked on white cardstock. So I ended up stamping all of the images from the set, lined them all up, stamped them onto white cardstock with the Juicy ink, and then embossed it with that antique gold embossing powder. And then did the exact same thing because everything's still on the lid of the stamp platform. So after I did the first set of images, I just stamped them a second time onto a piece of black cardstock and then coated it with the same embossing powder. So now I have every single image from this stamp set stamped and heat embossed, and there's quite a few images. This is a large set. This is one of the 6 by 8 inch stamp sets. So there's a bunch of images and fabulous sentiments, and I've got all of them now just stamped and heat embossed. And the funny thing was my original plan was to stamp and heat emboss and then do some messy watercoloring, let it go outside the lines, be all flowy, and it completely took on a mind of its own the minute I went with this. So I've got everything stamped, heat embossed. I then die cut all of the images with the coordinating wafer dies. So now they're all cut out. And that large there's a large border type of a die that will die cut out that bottom area of the first image that I had stamped. So I have that full one, and then I have all of these, this pile of other heat embossed images. So I'm going to finish my first card that I had originally kind of planned on doing without any watercoloring. And I trimmed down my sentiment strip, and then I pulled out some copper glitter paper because it just happened to go really, really well with this embossing powder. And then I also pulled out some black and white striped pattern paper that I have been hoarding. I said I wouldn't hoard it, but I did and have been. So I pulled that out. And then my card base is going to be heavyweight white cardstock cut to 5.5 by 8.5 inches and then scored at 4.25. So it'll be a top folding A2 size card. And I'm going to adhere the pattern paper directly to the card base. And then I'm going to adhere that little strip of glitter pattern paper or glitter paper and then the sentiment to the white cardstock that I had heat embossed and die cut. So I'm just running my tape runner right along, right above that heat embossed image, and then I can adhere the glitter paper and then adding a bit of extra adhesive to my sentiment, and I'm going to adhere that, and then I can just trim off that little piece that's kind of hanging over the edge. And then I decided to pop this up with a bit of foam tape just to give it that extra dimension. Since I've decided now to keep these cards more on the kind of clean and simple, very just classy, black. Instead of black, white, and gold, it's more kind of black, white, and almost coppery, which I was really liking. So I used the Simon Says Stamp foam tape for this just because it has a bit of that thinner profile that I really like. So I coated the back of this white cardstock with that, and I'm going to pop this onto my card base so that it is just kind of popped up over that black and white pattern paper. And then to finish off the inside of the card, I'm going to stamp another one of the sentiments from the stamp set. I'm going to stamp that with black ink. So I'm going to get that lined up so that I can stamp this a couple of times with the black ink just to make sure it's really good and intense. And once I have that stamped, I can adhere one of the stamped and heat embossed and die cut images that I had done earlier just to, you know, complete the inside of the card. So I'm just going to adhere that into place with some tape runner as well. And then as my final bit of embellishment, I went through all of my Nouveau drops, which I haven't used in a while. And I pulled out 4 different colors. So I've got black, white, ebony black, gloss white, golden, sunset, and copper penny. So I grabbed a scrap piece of cardstock just to squeeze these onto first to make sure they didn't have any, because sometimes if you haven't used them in a while, you go to squeeze it and there was like a little splat or, you know, an air bubble or whatever. So I squeezed them onto the scrap cardstock first before squeezing them onto my actual card. And I was very liberal with these and added a bunch of dots, since these are basically my only embellishment, really, since I'm not going to add any, you know, watercoloring and all that stuff. So I just went along and added this, and the golden sunset one is the one that it looks very cloudy at first when you apply it, but when it dries, that's when like the glitter really comes out in it and you can really see it. So while everything is still wet, I'm going to tap this really firmly on my work surface and on this like embossing powder container just to kind of smooth and flatten them out a little bit. And then I'm going to set this aside for a few hours to dry. I think Tonic recommends 24 hours for them to fully dry. So I like to set these aside on a shelf and not touch them. So that was card number 1. So while these are drying, I'm going to work on the rest of my cards. So I kind of arranged clusters of those heat embossed images onto a couple of card fronts. And then once I was happy with those, I'm going to get my card bases. So for these two, these are top folding A2 cards cut to 4 1/4 by 11. And then scored at 5.5 with my Teflon bone folder. So I'm going to do both of these cards at once since they're very similar, but I mix it up just a little bit just so they're not exactly the same. So I've got my card bases, and then I've got 2 pieces of white cardstock that were cut to 4 1/4 by 11, or 4 1/4 by 5.5. And I'm going to adhere my little clusters of images with a mix of multimedia matte adhesive and that same foam tape, just to, again, give things a little bit of dimension, mix it up a little bit so they're not all just sitting flat on the card. That's something I really like doing when I'm keeping things a lot more simple, is just incorporate a bit of foam tape, because if you pop things up, it just gives it that little extra something. So some of the images I adhered flat with the multimedia matte, and then the other ones I would pop up with that bit of foam tape. And on each card, I kind of kept the cluster to one side. Although looking at these, you could totally do these clusters like directly onto the card base and keep them more clean and simple. But I was determined to use the black and white straight pattern paper and the glitter paper because it just set everything off so nicely. And then for both of these, I used different sentiments from the My Tribe stamp set. And this thanks word I actually cut from one of the sentiments, but I'm going to butt it up against another one for the next card. So I stamped everything with black ink, and then I'm going to just trim off the edge of this. Rather, I was going to adhere the pattern paper like directly to this, but instead decided to trim off each side of these card fronts so I can pop these up with foam tape as well, because I just like the look of that. So I pulled out my guillotine trimmer and trimmed off roughly an inch, I think, off of, or not quite an inch off of each of these. And then I'm going to adhere my pattern paper and, again, more strips of this gorgeous glitter cardstock to my card bases. So I've got everything trimmed out, and now I can just start adhering everything to the card base. So I'm just going to add my tape runner to the card base, and then stick on that pattern paper and then that glitter paper. And then I'm going to run foam tape on the back of both of those little now narrower card fronts so that I can stick those into place as well. So it kind of just, I start going into my mass production mode doing things like this, like kind of doing all the same steps at once. It makes things a little bit easier. Those that are familiar with me and my crafting ways know that I end up running out, like my workspace gets smaller and smaller as I'm creating, and I make more and more of a mess. So doing things in similar steps at similar times makes it go a little bit smoother, so I'm not scrambling quite as much trying to find things, because that's usually part of the problem. So I'd finished those 2 cards, and then for my final card, I did this one in landscape mode, and ran the adhesive on the back of the card base itself, and then applied my little strip of glitter paper and a strip of pattern paper, and then I can flip this over and just trim off those 2 little bits that are hanging over the edge of the card base. And then my cluster of images I'm going to adhere directly to the card. And then once I've got that in place, I'm going to butt that thanks sentiment back up against the rest of it, and then ink this one up and stamp the entire sentiment. And it just so happened, I hadn't measured before I did this, but I just had enough space to stamp that next to the images I'd adhered before running out of space on the cards. So I was kind of glad that just happened to work. So after I've got all of the outside adhered and stamped, I'm going to finish off the insides of all of these. So I stamped all the sentiments that I wanted, and then I had these remaining stamped and heat embossed image. So I'm going to adhere all of these to the insides of the cards with the multimedia matte adhesive, and same thing, kind of doing like little clusters of them just to tie everything together. So and even these, as I was doing this, I was like, these would work so well on, like, again, just clean ensemble cards or even mini cards, like using the smaller images and just doing little clusters of them. I just really loved how these turned out with the black and white cardstock and the metallic heat embossing. It was so much fun making these. So after I had everything adhered to the insides of my cards, I can then go on and add all the Nouveau drops to the outsides of these. So that's also where it helps to do everything kind of mass production mode, because doing them all at once, it makes it a lot easier, and I don't have to worry so much about the Nouveau drops sitting for too long. You know, I don't have to worry about them clogging or anything like that. I can just do it all at once. Just the one thing to be wary of, and I'm still kind of amazed that I did this, is maybe spread out your cards and don't do it in a cluster like this. I'm still kind of shocked that I didn't end up resting my hand and smearing these Nouveau drops when I was doing it like this, though. Although at times I do this without thinking, because this goes back to when I used to do nails, when I used to own a salon. I rest my arm and my hand against my other hand. Like, I rest my right arm against the fingers of my left hand, so that just reminds me to keep my hand up. I'm doing it like right here. So that keeps my arm up, so I'm not resting it in the cards and smearing Nouveau drops everywhere. But normally just spread things out a little bit and don't do things like this, because I still I thought for a second I had smeared one and I was like, oh no, but I caught it on something, but not the cards, so we're good. So I added all of these, and then I'm going to set all these aside to dry for several hours, and that's going to finish off this set of cards. So as always, there will be a link below the video to the blog post. I'll have links to all the supplies used, so you can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!